Yeah, just for like a little bit of a preamble. So what we wanted to talk about today is it's a pull request that we literally just merged like as we're jumping on this call. We're sort of filing it as a little bit experimental just for the first iteration, and we're gonna keep working on it. And one of the things that I would like to get out of is a bit of a discussion here about the design of it. But we're introducing a feature called custom commands into Garden. It does what you would expect it to do just by that description. And I think conceptually, it's not very complicated. The purpose of it is to be able to, for whoever is sort of maintaining a project, you can define any number of custom commands as part of that project. And, the use cases will vary quite substantially, but like, it could be, you want to provide, a shorthand for like a, specific set of parameters that people keep using, some specific use case, that one command that you always run if you want to, work on that specific service in a certain way. You can start to I kind of script those out, but it goes a little bit further than that. You can, sorry, let me fix my, to make these, what did you call them? They say snoring noises in my mic.
All right,
yeah, just let me know if that's happening. You can think of them conceptually as sort of like, make file targets or like npm package scripts and things like that, except they're quite a bit more powerful. I think the best place to start would probably be, I'll share my screen and I'll kind of go through the documentation that we just pushed, and we'll be part of the documentation site as soon as we do the next release. Okay, so this gets parsed properly with Gitbook, but basically I'm putting a little bit of flag here, stating that this is currently considered experimental. And when we say something is experimental, like we expect it to work, and there's a lot of tests involved and all of that, but there may be some deficiencies in terms of the design or something, some minor API changes that you might see. But at this point, we wouldn't want to do anything that's not backwards compatible. So you shouldn't feel concerned about actually starting to use it. We start off with a little bit of an example here. So the way you define a custom command is, it's a new sort of Garden config type or kind. Oops, what did I just do here? Okay. You give it a name, obviously. And the names are, the same sorts of names you can give modules and tasks and tests and things like that. You give it a description. We require a short description. You can also give it a longer description for help text. And it can do one or both of two things. It can execute any command, like here I'm running a shell script. And for this sort of hypothetical example, I'm imagining that we have some submodules in the repo that we're working with. We keep forgetting to update them. So ahead of this Garden command, and it's always done in this order. We first run the exec, and then we run the Garden command. And you can sort of then, you can put in a bit of a preamble ahead of each Garden command that you want to run. And then for the Garden command, it's basically an array, like you just specify the actual command that you want to run, and then any parameters that you want to put in. And then here, it's a little bit of syntax magic here. You can, this is a little bit like, what's it? I keep forgetting it. What it is in Bash. It's like quotes, $, at symbol or something like this. You could carry over all the arguments from the command line. And then you have a few of these that you can supply. And this is sort of a simple example, like here we're just running some script, and then we're running a Garden command with some preset parameters. And this you could do like pretty much anything with. The nice thing is, if I hop into my console here, So I've just deployed this vote demo that I'm not going to spend much time on that. It's just, what I'm using here as a place of reference. So when I run garden help here, which by the way takes way too long because I'm running a dev build, but you can see the custom commands pop up here at the bottom with the short description text that's defined. So you can provide your team with, here are sort of our project commands, things that, that are specific to us, give that a bit of a description. And for each of these, so if I go here, for example, run task, I want to get the help text for that, works the same as any other command. I basically get which options have I defined, which arguments have I defined, which segues neatly into the fact that you can do that. So, so if I hop back to the documentation here, so I'll get back to, there are a few limitations that it's good to be aware of when you're defining these commands. And I've already covered some of the basics here. So this is all, pretty thoroughly documented in this new guide, which you'll find under advanced custom commands on docs.garden.io. There's a lot about templating, and I'll get into a little bit more detail here. And then you can define the expected arguments and option flags for these commands. So if you don't want to just pass them all directly to the underlying garden command or shell script, you can define, here for example, we're imagining sort of like a wrapper around running a single task, which is kind of maybe a dumb example. Maybe a better example would be something like, I want to execute something in a running container using garden exec, and I want to sort of pre-populate some command that we keep running inside a running container. And you can define pretty, in a robust way, which arguments are required. So you can have any number of positional arguments. Here we're just requiring one, which is a task name. This could be any number, and option flags. So here we have a DB option flag, which you can template in here. So here I have some, I'm imagining some scenario where there is a variable, I don't know, why does it do that? Where there's a variable in the say module config that's involved, or maybe this is like a project variable that you can override here, same as you would do on the normal garden command line, that overrides something that you may want to do sort of ad hoc. And going back to the terminal here, you can see this comes up here. And if I were to run, so if I could just run garden run task, I think there is a DB clear one. And I can run that without any options because it's not required. What this basically ends up doing, so I have this run task wrapper here. This will just run the task DB clear. We'll go through whatever needs to happen to do that. And the command definition in this particular scenario, maybe I zoom in a little bit, is this one here. So it's basically, I kind of plucked this from the documentation. I didn't go so far as to actually make this do something for this toy project that I have here, but just to kind of give you an illustration. And you can use the full templating syntax. So that means any helper function, any conditional, anything that you could normally do with Garden's templating, and you can reference the arguments, you can reference the options, very similarly to other variables and things like that. One caveat that's worth noting is that this is parsed before the project is fully resolved. So the only project variable the only project thing that you can reference is the name of the project. You can't reference project variables in here. You would have to do that within whatever command that you're running. But that's what you use the arguments and options for. You can also specify, similarly to module variables, you can specify variables here and then reference, you know, these in the Garden command or the exec command. But you won't get the actual project variables or things for var files and things, something like that. And this is done by design so that there isn't like a lot of heavy lifting that needs to happen before this is run, because we actually want this to happen fairly quickly. So we're kind of keeping it fairly simple, but as I mentioned in the guide, there's this limitation section here. We only pick up commands from the project root folder. So in my example here, I have defined a commands.garden.yaml, which I think is a good practice. So any *garden.yaml file in the project root will be picked up, but nothing beyond that. That's basically a performance optimization that we do. You cannot override built-in commands, and we thought about it, and we decided that would be a source of endless confusion potentially. If you've, say, overridden the deploy command, somebody sends a support message like, you know, like something weird is happening with the deploy command, and it's actually not the deploy command. So we just kind of made a design choice there. You can only template the exec and garden command fields, not the other ones. They need to be statically resolved. And as I mentioned, you cannot reference like project and environment variables. Those are resolved later in the process. But as I made a note to here, like please post a GitHub issue if you actually find some of this like too constraining, and we can look into it. Maybe there is something to be done about it.
I would also say, Jón, you know, there are, if you're clever about it, you know, you pass a variable in using a CLI argument, and then you can use that to look up in something that's nested in the project stuff. Mm-hmm. So it might not be as much of a limitation as it might seem on the outset, because you can use these things to index things that are then defined later. So, you know, you can be a bit clever about how you structure those things to make that, yeah, it's not as limiting as it might seem at first glance.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just good to be aware, and so that, you know, you don't like stumble into it. And you can also look at the actual reference for, so kind of digging into the templating section. There is a whole reference section on everything that you can reference in the templates. And mostly that's like similar to what you can use like in the top level project configuration, which is, you know, like as you're defining the project level variables. But and then we add these args and opt context. So a few things worth noting here. We provide a few built-ins. So there's args.all or $all. And that's like everything that you put in, like, you know, if I type here garden run task, blah, blah, bloop. So you would get all of these, as well as if I do, you know, this also comes included in the .all variable, which may be desirable in some cases. In many cases, you're going to want to use this one, the rest. So that's basically every positional argument and option that isn't also defined in the command. So here, for example, if I add this DB flag here, then this would be parsed out and not included in the rest variable, whereas this stuff would be. So just depends on like how you're passing it through. And then lastly, you have the option of using this dash variable, and that can be handy if you want to like very explicitly demarcate like what's a garden flag and what's something else, and you can you know, put whatever you want after double dash here, and then you can reference that specifically. You get like this of whatever comma you want in this variable here. So you have a few different ways you can reference these things. As part of the pull request, I added a new helper, which is this join helper, which I somehow thought we had already done, but kind of naturally came up. Say if you want to pass just everything on the command line to a shell script or something, or you want to interpolate it into like a one string, you can do it like this. You can just join every one of these with a space in a template string. And basically, yeah, because it's the exact same template language as everything else, you have all the same power that you usually have there. And, you know, most things, you know, most cases you're doing something simple, like just, you know, injecting a single variable, but sometimes you need to do some trickery. You want to, you know, do conditionals or, you know, whatever it is that you can think of. And you actually have a fair amount of power here, all in this declarative setup. Yeah, so now is a question of, well, actually, maybe it's one good thing. This is probably going to be a fairly common pattern. And you may or may not be aware of this little templating magic that we have, that you can also find in our documentation. I can point you to it if you like. Here I have a list of things, and Garden allows you to concatenate another list into that list. So here I'm taking this list of arguments, like any additional arguments that I hadn't parsed. I'm just appending it to this list that I have of, you know, the Garden command itself that worth the preset arguments. You know, if you weren't aware of this previously, you might find this helpful in all kinds of like module and service definitions. But it certainly comes into play here a lot. Like, you know, you want to preset some flags on a Garden command, but you want to allow putting any other flags in there as well. And we should note that unlike workflow step commands, if you've been using those, we've had the limitation that you can't put in like you can't pick a different environment in a workflow step command. You can with this. So you can pass any Garden flag. You can, yeah, set any environment. So you can preset an environment. You can, you know, you can do all kinds of, you know, if you want to automate like which environment is picked, or, you know, which variables are set, you can do all of that within this. And I actually made a note that using the same mechanism as we're applying to do that here, we will probably follow up and lift that limitation in workflow step commands as well. It's a relatively straightforward thing to do. It's just left it out of scope for this initial PR. But yeah, now, you know, now it kind of comes to like, what are some good use cases for this? And obviously, like anything that you have previously been wrapping in a different script, this, you know, you could easily port that over. I figured like maybe Thor and Aethor, like, you know, like when we're developing a Garden platform, for example, we tend to run certain things in a running service. So using, you could imagine, for example, so if I just kind of type one up here, so if I do like call a shell, like run a shell in the API service or something. Mm-hmm. You could do here exec sh. Sorry, exec API shs, and then you can pass on any other arguments. Mm-hmm. So this would be sort of like a typical thing that, you know, it's a command that not everybody knows is there. So you can provide a shorthand for it to make it more obvious to the team that you should use it. You may also have more elaborate commands that you keep running, like say,
give dependencies, you know, or like, if you want to only do dev mode on certain services, but you don't want to, like, you know, deploy the dependencies.
Yeah. So yeah, like this first command here, like API dev, what I preset this with is I start the API and worker services in dev mode and nothing else. And, you know, this is sort of like, I can imagine like, you know, this being sort of the command that you keep running as a developer, like, you know, working on a specific thing. So you could just codify that here. And another thing, like say, like I have let's say I have some, database migration script that is in the API container. Maybe I want to run that all the time, or, I want to reset a database like I just did there's already a task here called db clear, but maybe I just want to run that in a running container. So that's probably something that's going to be, let's say, call this one migrate, run db migrations, and we just imagine that that's just a script that's already part of the API service, and then I can super quickly run that next to anything else. Eyþór, like what sorts of things have we been doing that this would be useful for?
So the first thing that comes to mind is this use case you're describing here, like anything that has to do with the exec command, shelling into containers. I mean, running tests as well is another good example. Maybe focused tests, like, you might have there might be a part of the code base that is like very often under test that you might want to run in the remote container, but like, say, task auth or whatever, if you have like a entire test suite that or surrounding your, like, authentication setup, and then you can pass the like the file or the graph auth or whatever to the there you go.
You can do something like you can basically compile this in any way you want. You can add an explicit argument for say test name, or like test regex, I guess it would be in Mocha context, or like, something, or like test filter, I guess. Pick a test to run. It's not required, so we leave that off. And then, you can put in a conditional to put in the, I have to think about like how exactly to do this, like args filter, or something like this. I think this might work. I need to test it like with Mocha. I don't know, like if you need to explicitly skip the -g if you don't want to do that, but just, by way of example, you can imagine, or you can make this an option, or you can leave it and just, whatever else is passed to Mocha, you pass it through here.
One more thing that's kind of a slightly more advanced example of how it would be useful. You had this example where you had the -d flag to pick a database, which then maps to a var. I think variables are a very powerful and sometimes underused capability because they can be nested. And like, for example, if you want to expose to the developer, like, I want to deploy this set of services or want to toggle this set of settings. Currently, people often reach for setting up multiple environments to sort of toggle between sets of variables. But you could very easily sort of make it more usable by a developer, like, making little options, and then they end up influencing which key is looked up to look up in a nested set of options of sets of variables. So slice things that way.
Sure. I think, I mean, okay, let's see if we can, by way of example, do something here. So okay, let's hypothesize a little bit here. So let's just call a variable a mode. Something like this, mode default, and then you could here at the project level, mode default maybe, and then you can have modes plural default, and I think then you could have, something like enabled services, and API, or and then you can have different variations here, and then how you would reference this. So just, just by way of example, you could do, so var modes, var mode. And then you get this whole object, which you can then reference with enabled services. So you can do like, you can do a few different things like that. Maybe this ends up being a little bit more clumsy than just like conditionally setting enabled services based on which mode you have defined. But there's certainly no shortage of, different ways you can reason about these things. And if the combination of having like these custom commands where you can sort of define these for yourself and preset some of this stuff, and then all the templating that you can do, with the variables, etc. You're not going to run out of flexibility, I think.
Just quick comment, just to prevent confusion. So like in your example that you actually just deleted, but if you undo that, you're not able to reference the modes under the same variable factor, but you could do that in a module, right? Just do like
you would do this in like
in a module,
in a module somewhere. Exactly. And not so much here next to it. That's actually another enhancement that's on the way. I started poking at that just so that you can actually reference within the same block, but it was just something that I sort of prototyped a little while back. I didn't dare get into it because it was like, I felt it needed a little bit more testing, but that's something that it's a little enhancement that we wanted to make as well. But yeah, so that's kind of it. I mean, it isn't much more complicated than this, and we could sort of, we could enumerate more ideas for use cases. I think, sometimes it's as simple as running a script. I think we'll find that we will find a lot of use for like prefacing a garden command with a shell script that could be useful in many different contexts. Automating somewhat, long, clumsy commands that you would otherwise have to remember. That's handy. And yeah, like you have a lot to work with. Any questions from anybody?
I have a quick question. I'm not sure if you mentioned it or saw it in the limitations, but so parallel execution of commands, that's probably not possible. So it's just so if you have like an exec, it will have to terminate and then it will execute the garden command.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So you couldn't have like your build command run and then execute dev deploy in like a separate.
No, but that would be nice though. It's a nice idea.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, let me so would it just be running the two in parallel or running one before the other, or like how would you imagine it?
Well, specifically we have like usually, or in the current project, we would have 3 commands running. So we would have usually the yarn build, so where just TypeScript keeps compiling. Then you have like the garden deploy minus dev deploying the backend, and that then syncs the compiled TypeScript, and then also the garden run local module for the front end. And if we could run those in parallel on one command, that'd be super.
So it's almost like like a start a long running command that runs all of my local stuff, and then also start the remote stuff with garden.
Yep, that'd be sweet.
Yeah,
I mean, this will be addressed. I think not partially, but like fully. Once we also just support long running local processes with garden, right? Could that cover that use case, or is there more to it? So where you can have like an exec module, say, that runs yarn dev, but doesn't just hang, but is part of your like normal garden deploy or garden dev flow.
Yeah,
I think that should cover it as well. Just
yeah. So that's yeah, so what that refers to, so is like we wanted to add like so like in dev mode you could in an exec module run a service like and keep it running during the garden process execution, and that could be like your like yarn build
Right.
or yarn watch or like whatever it is that you're doing, that you could turn on for the local environment, for example.
So you had like a service, you would just deploy that local module. Right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and you would be able to, also like in terms of the logging, you'd be able to sort of get at it with garden logs. It would sort of be a first-class citizen among the other services, because like, the logging experience with what you're describing is kind of like unclear. It would work, but I think, it would plug more into the native facilities of garden if it were a proper service with the proper handlers and stuff. But
yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, because otherwise you would have like the command just like kind of go into some nirvana. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, we've been so there is a way to, there is like a sort of a deploy service and a cleanup service thing that you can do with exec modules now, but then Garden isn't managing that process. It just kicks something off and then is unaware of what's happening, which is different from like actually running a process, and then we can pipe the logs into like a file that you can then tail, and then Garden, like if the Garden logs handler for exec modules would that work too, just by tailing that file. So yeah, we sort of mapped that out, and this would be sort of a natural next thing for you. And I think, we always have to be sort of selective, like, are we going to like introduce more complexity here in this command thing, or do we just, support your use case in the sort of normal Garden graph execution? I think
the second option probably makes more sense. Yeah.
We are looking at, in Q1 sort of improving the first class support for local services in the framework. You can run sort of exec modules with, Garden run module, and then, that's what we're currently doing. We're running the front end, but that's in a separate window, a separate terminal tab or whatever. But as we flesh out that sort of hybrid development story, this is going to be a piece of that, the sort of process management and logging and all that stuff. And you're seeing the log entry, like, my local service is up, kind of deal, and the error logging and all that stuff. Yeah.
For whatever reason, because the documentation for this should be here now. We would need to figure out why Gitbook isn't doing its thing, but we'll get it up there. And in the meantime, you can it would be under advanced, and custom commands. So you can see the documentation for this, and it's already on the main branch. So it's on the Edge release. So you can run Garden self update Edge to fetch that if you want to give it a spin. And then if you add this to the project and somebody doesn't have that version, they just don't see the commands. It's like a totally non-breaking addition to the project. And I believe, like, if Garden doesn't recognize the kind it finds, it just ignores it. So that should be fine.
And of course, it's going to be part of the next release.
Yeah, so that's next week.
Yeah.
I think pending any questions, I think that's all I had to demo. Anything?
I have a quick question on the design of this feature. So you can execute the command locally before the Garden command, but did you think about like a post command to be executed afterwards as well?
Yeah, I figured like I thought like 50% chance somebody's going to ask for that at some point, and then that's a sort of a reasonable thing to add. I couldn't kind of think of like an obvious use case for it, but it's like that's a fairly trivial thing to throw to the mix. I think it's just a question of like what the API looks like, but and yeah, like, it's so easy to let it just kind of, okay, now it's like practically like it starts to look almost exactly like a workflow, for example. It's and you know, it deliberately has different constraints than workflows, because it's meant to be a little bit more snappy. But I think, yeah, adding one more, you know, like making garden, like, you know, allowing an array of garden commands, I suppose, is viable. You know, there's a few different things that we could do, but I wanted to kind of keep it a little tight for the first iteration, and then we can kind of see what we want to do next, and sort of wait for the use case to guide it, I guess.
Thanks for showing up, folks. It was
Yeah,
nice to
Thanks for the demo.
be here.
That was cool.
Thanks so much, everyone.
nice to
Very
see
exciting.
everybody.
Goodbye.
you.
All right.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.